Welcome back to the deep dive. So, if you've ever signed a lease, hired a contractor, maybe even just bought something online, you've entered into a contract. It's really the fundamental backbone of all commerce. But what happens when that promise reaches the finish line? Or, maybe worse, when it just collapses entirely. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the legal climax of any agreement, how contracts legally end, what's known as discharge, and then what happens when they fail. We're focusing on the legal remedies. This deep dive is really designed to give you the essential knowledge. So the four main ways a contract terminates, and the really crucial distinction between the court's money fix and its, let's call it, fairness fix. We're going to try and cut through the complexity here.
Okay.
Let's unpack this.
Yeah, and the structure of this material is, it's surprisingly elegant. It really divides the end of a contract into two great themes. You have the controlled, intentional end, and then you have the messy, forced end. And if you understand these four modes of discharge, you pretty much mastered the final chapter of contract law. Then we can move straight into the rules recovery, focusing on the rationale behind the two powerful ways courts can step in. So, compensating your loss versus compelling a specific action.
That distinction, controlled versus messy, that's a great way to frame it. So let's start with the clean break, the scenarios where, everyone is either happy or at least they're in mutual agreement. What are the two best-case scenarios for a contract to end?
Well, the absolute cleanest end is discharge by performance.
Right. The ideal outcome.
It's the ideal outcome, the most straightforward pillar. It just means both parties have fully and exactly done what they promised. The contract served its purpose, and it just devolves.
Simple as that. You delivered the 500 widgets, I paid the $5,000.
And we're both done. The legal relationship just ceases to exist because the obligations are fulfilled. It's clean.
Simple, clean. But, life is rarely that tidy. What if we get halfway through a major project and realize, it's no longer in either of our interests to keep going?
Right, and that leads us to the second pillar of that controlled end, and that's discharge by agreement.
A mutual breakup.
It's a controlled mutual breakup, exactly. The parties agree to terminate the remaining obligations early. But here's where it gets a little bit interesting, and where, non-lawyers can sometimes stumble. If both parties still have things left to do, say, you still owe me 3 more deliveries, I still owe you 2 more payments, it's simple.
Okay.
We just agree to drop our remaining promises. That mutual release cancels the old contract.
But what if I've already completely done my side of the deal and you're the only one with obligations left?
That is the hidden trap.
Yeah.
If I've already done all my work and you just agree to let me off the hook for your last payment, that agreement to cancel might not be legally binding.
Wait, why?
Because I am giving you nothing new in return for your release. You need a brand new promise, what the law calls consideration, or some new benefit for that termination agreement to be valid.
So without that, you could agree to cancel, and I could still turn around and sue you for the original payment later on.
You absolutely could. Wow. So that mutual decision to end the contract has to be treated like a miniature brand new contract itself.
Especially if one person is already finished with their duties.
Precisely. You need a new promise or even a token payment to seal that cancellation.
Yeah.
It just proves that the concept of consideration, that bargain for exchange, is there at the birth of a contract and often at its deliberate death, too.
Okay, so we've covered the clean ends. Performance, agreement. Now for the messy situations, the ones that often land everybody in court. Let's start with a failure that's outside of human control.
That takes us to discharge by frustration. And this is, it's truly fascinating because it's external. It's entirely beyond the fault or even the foresight of either party. An event happens after the contract is made, but it makes the contract either literally impossible to perform, illegal, or it just radically transforms the nature of the obligation.
Right, like that classic historical example, right? If I contract to rent a specific room in a city to watch the king's coronation parade.
Yes.
And then the king gets sick and the whole parade is canceled. I could still rent the room, but the entire commercial purpose of the contract has just vanished.
That's exactly the case that established this rule in English law, Creel v. Henry. The event, the parade, was the whole foundation of the contract.
Yeah.
When the event disappeared, the contract was deemed frustrated. The law basically steps in and says, look, this situation is so fundamentally different from what was agreed upon, it would be unjust to hold the parties to it.
So it's a high bar to clear.
A very high bar. And the key insight here for you is that frustration is not about a bad deal or, a slight inconvenience. If performing the contract just becomes way more expensive, say the cost of your raw materials tripled, that's usually just a business risk you assumed. Frustration requires a transformation so radical that the performance is, for all intents and purposes, meaningless or impossible.
So frustration is fate stepping in, but what happens when the failure is just simple human fault? I mean, the deliberate refusal or just inability to honor the promise.
And that, of course, is discharge by breach. This is the big one. This is the event that gives the injured party the legal right to sue for remedies. When one party fails to perform, they've breached the contract.
So the crucial question then becomes, when does a breach allow me to just walk away from my side of the deal versus when am I stuck finishing my obligations and just, collecting some money for the trouble?
That is the most high-stakes distinction in contract law. That all comes down to the severity of the term that was breached. And terms are generally categorized into two main types. First, you have a condition. A condition is a fundamental term. It's the core essence of the agreement. If you breach a condition, the injured party is discharged from their obligations and can sue for damages.
So they can just walk away?
They're free. They can walk away, find a substitute. The second is a warranty. A warranty is a minor term, peripheral to the main purpose. If you breach a warranty, the injured party must still perform their side of the bargain.
But they can sue for whatever financial loss that minor breach caused.
Exactly. The difference between a condition and a warranty really is the difference between freedom and being stuck.
Can you give us a practical example?
Sure. Imagine you hire a shipping company. A condition might be that the ship has to arrive at Port A by October 1st, because the goods inside are seasonal.
Okay, makes sense.
If they arrive October 5th, the core purpose is defeated. You can terminate the entire contract. A warranty might be that the ship has built-in refrigeration, but it turns out it's just slightly under the contracted temperature.
So the goods still arrived, they're usable, but maybe there was a small loss in quality.
Precisely. You can't cancel the entire massive shipping contract for that. You just get compensated for that diminished quality.
That's a powerful overview of the 4 ways the contract ends. But as soon as we talk about breach, we have to transition straight into recovery. So when the promise fails, the law steps in. Let's start with the most common response: damages. The money.
Right. And the guiding philosophy here is actually simple and very focused. The law aims to protect the injured party's expectation interest.
Their expectation interest.
Yeah. Damages are intended to put the injured party in the financial position they would have been in had the contract been properly, fully performed. You can think of it like a calculation. What profit or benefit or gain did you expect, and what financial cost is required to deliver that same expectation now that the deal is broken? The court is focused purely on quantifying that economic loss.
So if I contracted to buy a custom-made machine for $50,000 and the seller breaches, and I'm forced to buy the exact same machine from another vendor for $65,000.
Then your damages are the $15,000 difference.
Yeah. Because that $15,000 restores my expectation. It makes me whole.
Precisely. And this leads to a really crucial policy point. The goal of contract damages is compensation, not punishment.
Right.
The court is measuring the loss you suffered, not trying to punish the wrong the other party committed. This is why, typically, contract law does not award punitive damages.
So why is the legal system so restrictive there? Why not hit the breaching party hard to, discourage bad behavior?
It really comes down to commercial certainty and risk management. I mean, businesses need to be able to calculate their maximum potential financial exposure if they can't perform a contract.
I see.
If they knew they could face unlimited punitive damages, they would be far less likely to enter into risky but, potentially profitable ventures. It would stifle commerce. The predictability of compensatory damages is what stabilizes the market.
So it keeps the wheels of business turning.
It does. Now, there are extremely rare exceptions where a breach of contract is linked to a separate civil wrong, like, say, fraud or deceit, what we call tortious conduct. In those very specific cases, the underlying tort might allow for punitive damages, but the contract claim itself is almost always restricted to just compensation.
That clarity on the rule compensation, not retribution, that's a necessary insight. Now here's where it gets, I think, really interesting. We've established the standard fix is money, but sometimes money just won't solve the problem.
Right.
Especially if the item you contracted for is unique or irreplaceable. You can't just take the $15,000 difference and buy another one. This is where the court uses equitable remedies, the fairness fix.
That's exactly right. Equity steps in when financial compensation is considered inadequate. When the subject matter is truly unique, the law offers specific performance and injunctions. And these remedies are exceptional because the court is going beyond just compensating a loss. It's compelling a party to act or refrain from acting.
Okay, let's start with specific performance. That means the court literally forces the breaching party to do what they promised, right?
That is exactly what it is. The court orders the breaching party to hand over the contracted item or complete the specific action. But what's fascinating here is how limited and discretionary this power is. The court really tries to avoid using it if possible.
And why is that? I mean, why not always force performance if that's what was promised in the first place?
Well, the first big reason is uniqueness. Specific performance is typically only available when the subject matter is one of a kind.
Like a piece of land?
Exactly. This is why contracts for land are almost always eligible, because every parcel of land is legally unique. Same for a specific, irreplaceable heirloom, or say, a rare piece of art. If the item is just a commodity, a bulk order of steel beams, damages are adequate because you can just take the money and buy them somewhere else. The second reason, and maybe the more nuanced one, is that courts generally refuse to award specific performance for personal service contracts.
So they won't force an artist to paint a portrait.
Or an engineer to write a specific line of code? No. Forcing a person to perform a personal service is seen as bordering on compulsion. It infringes on personal liberty, and practically speaking, it would create an impossible managerial headache for the court.
How so?
I mean, how do you monitor the quality of a forced performance? A painter who's forced to paint might just do a terrible job out of spite. The court will not step into that kind of supervisory role.
That makes perfect sense. The court doesn't want to become a contract manager. Okay, so specific performance forces action, but only when the item is unique. What about the flip side, telling someone what they can't do?
And that's the function of an injunction. An injunction is a court order instructing a party not to do something. It prohibits a specific action.
And this is often used for things like non-compete clauses.
That's the classic example. You have a high-level executive who signs a contract promising not to work for a direct competitor for a year after leaving. If they immediately try to breach that promise, their former employer would seek an injunction.
So instead of trying to calculate the, almost impossible to calculate damages from stolen secrets, the court just issues an order.
An order forbidding the executive from taking that specific competing job.
Exactly.
The court uses the injunction to prevent irreparable harm from happening in the first place. It enforces the negative promise that was made.
It sounds like both of these equitable remedies, specific performance and injunctions, carry a lot more weight and complexity than just simple damages.
They do, and you have to grasp this critical distinction. Damages are awarded as a right. If you can prove a breach and a resulting loss, you get them. Equitable remedies are entirely discretionary.
Meaning the court gets to decide.
The court weighs everything: fairness, the conduct of the injured party, necessity. If the party seeking specific performance waited too long or, acted unfairly themselves, the court can and often will refuse the remedy, leaving them with only the option of money. They're reserved for cases where money is clearly just not enough.
So, to wrap this all up, you now have a clear framework for understanding how contracts end. The 4 types of discharge, whether it's clean, mutual, accidental, or by someone's fault.
Right. And you also have that crucial distinction between compensatory damages, the money, and these powerful non-monetary tools of specific performance and injunctions.
You understand the difference between compensating for a lost expectation and forcing an action based on uniqueness.
And you know that breaching a condition can free you from the contract, while breaching a warranty leaves you stuck, but with a claim for damages. These really are the crucial signposts for navigating the end of any agreement.
Which, it brings up an interesting final question for you to think about. If a famous, highly sought-after opera singer breaches her contract to perform on opening night, maybe citing a minor illness, what kind of remedy, monetary damages, or an equitable remedy like specific performance, or maybe an injunction against them performing elsewhere, what would the promoter most likely seek? And more importantly, why would the court almost certainly refuse to grant specific performance? It raises a really important question about the practical limits and the policy considerations that are baked into these legal tools. And that brings us to the end of this deep dive into contract law. Thank you for joining us as we navigated the rules of discharge and recovery. We'll catch you next time.